There are moments when everything on the outside seems fine. The job is steady. The relationships look intact. The bills are paid. There's no visible chaos, no dramatic collapse, but somewhere beneath the surface, quietly, persistently, there's a dull ache. An ache without a name. It doesn't scream, but it doesn't go away either. It lingers in the background like a song you didn't choose, playing softly, yet unbearably loud when the world finally quiets down. This kind of emptiness doesn't come from a tragedy. It comes from a slow forgetting, a fading of vitality, a subtle loss of color in the canvas of everyday life. And the most disorienting part? Nothing is really wrong. And yet, something feels deeply off. When life becomes too stable, too predictable, too in order, the soul can fall asleep. Not in peace, but in resignation, like a flame that hasn't gone out, but no longer dances. It's not that you're unhappy. It's that you feel nothing that truly moves you. And that, in itself, begins to ache. We are told to chase security. We are taught that peace means no problems. But what if peace without presence is just another form of absence? What if comfort, unchecked, becomes a kind of anesthetic, numbing not only pain, but also passion, wonder, and the raw edge of being truly alive? You may have followed every rule. You may have done everything right. And still, a voice inside whispers, "Is this it?" This isn't about blaming yourself. This isn't about failure. This is about waking up gently to a deeper truth, one that lives beneath performance, beneath success, beneath even the idea of happiness. A truth that can't be measured in achievements, but only felt in presence, in connection, in meaning. Sometimes the soul stops speaking in words, and instead it begins to echo. And that echo, that silence within the silence, is not emptiness. It's a signal, a threshold, a subtle, sacred doorway. And maybe, just maybe, you're not broken. Maybe you've simply been away from yourself for too long. It's easy to mistake stillness for peace, to believe that if nothing hurts, then everything must be fine. But the absence of pain is not the same as the presence of meaning. A quiet life isn't always a connected life, and sometimes what we call stability is actually just a well-decorated cage. The mind is quick to rationalize. It says, "You should be grateful. Nothing's wrong. Look how lucky you are." But the body often disagrees. Deep within, there's a sense of flatness. The colors of life feel washed out. Conversations become automatic. Days blur together. And slowly, you begin to disappear inside your own routine. This isn't weakness. It's not a failure of gratitude. It's biology. It's psychology. It's soul. The brain was never designed to simply avoid pain. It was built to seek growth, connection, transcendence. Without meaning, even a calm life begins to dull the spirit. The dopamine that once sparked in the face of discovery or depth begins to fade. And what's left is not peace. It's numbness. The world often tells you to aim for balance, for comfort, for safety. But comfort without truth creates silence. Not the nourishing kind, but the kind that deadens. It's the silence that fills a room where no one speaks honestly. The silence that grows in a relationship that functions, but no longer touches. The silence between who you are and who you pretend to be. There's a kind of fatigue that doesn't come from doing too much, but from doing the wrong things for too long. From living inside roles that don't match your soul. From playing it safe so many times that your spirit no longer feels the risk of being real. You don't need to create chaos to feel alive, but you do need meaning. And meaning doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from facing yourself, from asking uncomfortable questions, from listening to what your silence has been trying to say. There's a subtle ache that arises when you reach out for something deeper. But what comes back feels staged. You wanted intimacy and received admiration. You sought presence and got applause. In a world that rewards image over essence, Even your spiritual search can become a mask. A beautiful, glowing mask. But a mask, still. Sometimes the most polished version of you is the one that hides you best. You meditate. You journal. You speak about energy, light, alignment, and yet, something feels off. Not because those things are false, but because they've become performance. They've become armor. The higher self became a character, not a home. It's tempting to climb the ladder of spiritual correctness, speaking gently, acting consciously, radiating positivity. But often, beneath that curated presence, the wounded child still waits. The body still holds the tremble. The heart still longs to be seen in its rawness. And it's not seeking enlightenment, it's seeking truth. Carl Jung wrote of the persona, the social mask we wear to meet the world. And when the persona becomes spiritual, it can be even harder to detect, because it looks right, it sounds wise. But deep down, you know when you're faking light to avoid feeling the dark. You may call it growth, but if it distances you from your own shadow, it's not growth, it's disguise. And that's where the emptiness creeps in again. Because connection, real connection, cannot happen through a mask. Not even a sacred one. There is a loneliness that arises not from being alone, but from being unseen. And when you are seen only through your spiritual performance, a part of you begins to feel invisible. That part aches. Not for perfection, not for transcendence, but for realness. For the quiet, imperfect truth of simply being. Sometimes your mind says, "I'm fine." But your body doesn't believe it. It flinches when touched a certain way. It tightens when certain words are spoken. It hesitates in moments that should feel safe. And in those subtle reactions, barely noticed by others, your truth lives. The nervous system holds stories that the conscious mind has forgotten. Not with words, but with sensations, with rhythms, with tension. You may have learned to suppress pain, to stay functional, to keep going. But your body keeps the score. It speaks in fatigue, in tight shoulders, in restless sleep, in that heaviness in the chest that no doctor can explain. This isn't imagination. It's memory, somatic memory. Emotional imprints stored deep in the tissues of your being. And while your mind negotiates reality, your body tells the truth. It doesn't care about appearances. It remembers what was too much, too soon, or too long ignored. And when left unacknowledged, that memory begins to echo. Not in words, but in vibration. There's a dissonance that emerges when your thoughts say one thing, but your body says another. That split creates confusion. You feel disconnected from yourself. You wonder why, even in safe moments, anxiety still pulses. Why, even in love, fear still lingers. The body isn't betraying you. It's asking to be heard. Gabor Mate reminds us that trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you when connection is broken. And often, the first connection to break is the one between body and soul. When pain is too heavy to process, we numb, we override, we rationalize. But the body, it waits, silently, patiently, until you're ready to return. Healing, then, is not about erasing the past. It's about reuniting with the parts of you that had to go quiet. It's about learning to feel again, without judgment, without hurry, to let the body speak, to let the silence move, and in that trembling space, to finally be whole. There is a kind of longing that doesn't point to something lost, but to something imagined. A version of love that was never received. A depth of belonging that never quite arrived. A vision of self that always felt just out of reach. And so the emptiness isn't a void. It's a mirror, reflecting not what was, but what you thought should have been. Nietzsche once said that we suffer not from the facts of life, but from the illusions we build around them. And perhaps the most painful illusion is the one we construct about completion. That one day we will find the perfect connection, the ideal self, the moment where everything finally makes sense. But what if that longing itself is what keeps us from being here? You may feel haunted by a sensation that something essential is missing, that something important was taken or slipped through your fingers. But look closer. Sometimes what feels like absence is not memory. It's fantasy, not truth, but a dream built on unmet needs and inherited stories. A dream that shaped your expectations before you ever had a chance to question them. We're told from early on what happiness looks like, what love should feel like, what success must include, and slowly, without realizing, we internalize those ideals. We project them onto our relationships, our careers, even our spiritual paths. But when life doesn't match the script, a dissonance emerges. And we call that dissonance emptiness. But maybe it's not emptiness. Maybe it's clarity. Maybe what you're feeling is not the lack of something real, but the collapse of something false. A structure of belief that no longer holds. A role that no longer fits. A narrative that no longer feeds your soul. And that collapse, as disorienting as it is, might be the beginning of something truer. Not the end of connection, but the end of illusion. Not the loss of self, but the quiet return to a self that was never built on someone else's idea of enough. There's a particular kind of fatigue that doesn't show on the surface. A weariness that lives behind composed eyes, beneath steady hands, inside the voice that always says, "I'm fine." It's not the exhaustion of doing too much, it's the exhaustion of being too much for too long, of holding yourself together so well that no one notices you're slowly fading. You've become the strong one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't fall apart. But strength, when it becomes performance, is not resilience. It's concealment, and the cost of being the one who holds everyone else is often the quiet disintegration of your own center. In the stillness of the night, when no one needs you and nothing demands your effort, the truth emerges. A kind of internal collapse, not dramatic, not loud, just a slow dimming, a quiet resignation, as if a part of you has stopped hoping to be seen beyond your competence. The persona of strength is seductive. It earns approval, it grants control, but it also builds a wall between you and your own vulnerability. And behind that wall, the inner chaos remains untouched, hidden, alive, waiting. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, not as evil, but as unlived truth. And often the strongest shadow is the one cast by the image of perfection. The self that smiles through pain, that excels through emptiness, that functions, even as it forgets how to feel. This kind of vibrational exhaustion doesn't come from failure. It comes from dissociation, from disconnecting your being into fragments. The one who shows up, the one who hides, the one who quietly carries everything no one else sees. Over time, this split creates a numbness that masquerades as calm, but underneath it, a storm is brewing. To be whole is not to be invincible. It's to be integrated, to let the inner tremble be part of the story, to allow yourself the grace of imperfection, and in doing so to reclaim not only your softness, but your presence, because strength without truth is not strength. It's exile, and the soul was never meant to live in exile. There are places within you that have gone silent, not because they healed, but because they were never touched. Parts of your being that became quiet in order to survive. Emotions that were too intense, sensations that overwhelmed, truths that arrived too early or too late. So you learned to turn the volume down, to move on, to keep going. But what was numbed doesn't disappear. It waits. Inside the body, beneath the thoughts, behind the behaviors that feel automatic. And slowly, that numbness becomes the landscape. You forget how it feels to feel. You forget what presence really means. To return to yourself is not to force anything. It is not to dig or provoke or demand. It is to sit gently with the echo, to notice, to breathe, to let your awareness move through the body like warm light, not to fix, but to witness, not to control, but to reconnect. Begin with stillness, not as a task, but as an invitation. Let the silence rise. Let your attention drop beneath the mind, into the throat, the chest, the belly. Let your breath meet what has been waiting there. Tightness, tremble, pressure, heat. Name it if you can. Not as diagnosis, but as dialogue. Then imagine the emptiness, not as something to avoid, but as a space, a container, a room that once held something precious and now feels hollow. Ask it, without words, what it protects, what it remembers, what it needs. The answer may not come in language. It may come as an image, a memory, a sensation. Let that be enough. This is not a cure. It's a return, a re-entry into the forgotten corridors of the self. Carl Jung spoke of the process of individuation as a descent, not into darkness for its own sake, but into the wholeness that includes it. And in this descent, there is guidance, not from outside, but from within. Pain is not the enemy, nor is numbness. They are signals, companions, messengers from a time when your truth had to go silent to keep you safe. And now they return, not to haunt you, but to remind you that safety alone is not enough, that your soul is ready to feel again, fully, fiercely, without fear. In the stillness of suffering, there is a question that often goes unspoken. What is the point? When emptiness lingers, not as a moment, but as a mood, the mind begins to seek reasons. And when it finds none, despair can begin to take root. But Viktor Frankl, who endured the silence of concentration camps and the brutality of human suffering, offered something radical. The idea that meaning is not something you find. It's something you live toward, even in pain, especially in pain. Frankl believed that the deepest wounds could become sources of transcendence, not through denial, not through control, but through connection to something greater, something enduring, something real. And neuroscience echoes this truth. The human brain does not thrive merely on pleasure. It is wired for purpose, for direction, for the sense that our experiences, no matter how painful, are connected to something meaningful. When your life feels empty, it may not be because something is broken. It may be because your soul is starving, not for comfort, but for truth, not for ease, but for depth. The dopamine system in the brain, often associated with motivation and reward, responds far more to meaningful action than to passive satisfaction. It lights up when you engage with what matters, when your pain is part of a larger story, when your struggle aligns with your essence. So the emptiness isn't a flaw, it's a signal. It is your being refusing to settle, refusing to live a life without resonance. It is the silence before the song, the dark before the dawn. Not a void, but a threshold. You are not alone in this. There is a quiet tribe of souls who have also walked through numbness, through performance, through false strength, and emerged not with answers, but with presence. People who no longer seek to impress or escape, but to embody. People who have learned to sit with the ache and listen to what it wants to become. And perhaps, in your own time, you will too. Not by chasing meaning as a destination, but by walking with it, as a companion, as a question, as the light that flickers even in your darkest hour. If you feel that emptiness visiting you, even when everything seems fine, maybe it's not something to fix. Maybe it's something to follow. A guide, a voice, a call back to what's real. What part of you is still waiting to be felt before it can finally be free? If something in you has been quietly nodding through every word, if a stillness, familiar and wordless, has been echoing inside, you're not imagining things. That silence has a shape. That emptiness has a pulse. It has been walking with you longer than you've realized, asking not for solutions, but for recognition. Perhaps it began as a whisper, then a tension, then a hollow ache beneath the surface of success. It may have visited you during moments of quiet triumph, or in the middle of laughter that didn't quite reach your core. It shows up where the world claps but the soul turns away, where everything looks right but feels off. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to understand all of it. But maybe now, you can begin to feel it without fear. To see it not as a flaw in your story, but as the place where your story begins to deepen. Because sometimes it's not that you've lost your way. It's that the path you followed was never truly yours. And so now, without pressure, without urgency, a door appears. Not outside, inside, not grand or dramatic, just a quiet invitation to stop hiding, to stop pretending, to sit with the truth. Not the loud one, but the one that lives beneath your roles, your tasks, your image. Maybe nothing is wrong with you. Maybe this ache is a sign of life. Maybe your emptiness is not the end, but the edge, the threshold, the moment before a return. What part of you is still waiting to be felt before it can finally come home? If this emptiness has been walking beside you, quietly, persistently, know this: it's not your enemy. It's your compass. It's the way your soul says, there's more. Not more to do, not more to prove, but more of you to remember. You don't need to fix yourself. You don't need to become someone else. What's being asked of you is far more honest than that. It's a return, a soft turning inward, toward the parts you silenced to survive, toward the truths you buried to belong, toward the feelings you postponed in order to function. This journey is not for everyone. But if something in you recognizes this message, not with your mind, but with your body, your ache, your longing, then maybe it's your time. The time to stop performing peace and start exploring presence. The time to stop wearing strength and begin reclaiming truth. The time to stop waiting for meaning to arrive and begin walking in its direction. If this resonated with you, not as content but as mirror, not as answer but as echo, trust that. Follow that. Let this be more than a video. Let it be a pause, a breath, a moment of sacred discomfort that opens something new. And when the silence returns, don't run from it. Listen. That silence may be the place where your soul is finally ready to speak.